In the British Museum, there is a cup the size of a coffee mug. When the lights in the hall go out and the curator shines a beam from inside, the room goes silent, because the glass that was dark green a second ago suddenly blazes deep blood red. Instantly, without warning. No special effect, no colored light, no dye. The effect is hidden inside the structure of the glass itself. And when in 1990, scientists at the British Museum finally cracked open a fragment of this glass under a transmission electron microscope, they stopped. Inside were nanoparticles, gold and silver, precisely calibrated, 50 nanometers in size, 1,000 times thinner than a human hair. Official science states nanotechnology was invented in the 1980s. That controlling matter at the atomic level is an achievement of the 20th century. This cup was made in 300 AD, and it proves otherwise. This is Brain Horizon. We don't build mystery, we prove it. Let's go. Before we explain what's hidden inside this glass, you need to understand why it matters. Nanotechnology isn't just about small particles. When metal shrinks to 50 to 100 nanometers in size, it stops behaving like that same metal in its normal state. Gold in normal form is yellow. Gold at 50 nanometers is red or violet. That's not magic, that's physics. It's called surface plasmon resonance. Electrons on the surface of a nanoparticle resonate with light waves and absorb certain wavelengths while letting others pass through. Today, this effect is used in medical diagnostics, biosensors, and water contamination detectors. The first practical applications appeared in the 1980s. Roman craftsmen were using this same principle without knowing its name, 1,600 years before that. By the end of this video, you will know the exact composition of the nanoparticles inside this cup. You will understand why this technology vanished within 100 years of its creation. And you will hear why researchers only managed to replicate it in 2019, using a 3D printer. Let's start with the question that haunted scientists for 40 years. Where did this cup even come from? Nobody knows where the Lycurgus Cup was made. No documents, no craftsman's signature, no find spot. Its first mention in print dates to 1845. A French writer described it as an object he had seen in Paris some years ago in the hands of a certain Monsieur Dubois. Who Dubois was, nobody knows to this day. Shortly after, the cup was acquired by the Rothschild family, one of the wealthiest dynasties in Europe, people with access to the finest minds of their era. In 1862, Lionel de Rothschild lent it to an exhibition, then took it back. The cup was nearly forgotten. It stood in the Rothschild collection for 105 years. A beautiful object. Expensive. Unexplained. Only in 1950, at the personal request of Lord Rothschild, did researchers Harden and Toynbee conduct the first serious study. And the first thing they confirmed was this: the cup is made of glass, not stone. Until that moment, even that question had remained open. In 1958, the British Museum purchased the cup from Victor, Lord Rothschild, for £20,000. At the exchange rate of the time, the price of a modest house in London, for an object that officially remained a mystery for another 40 years after the purchase. Think about that. One of the world's greatest museums paid a fortune for something it didn't understand. And for the next 4 decades, it sat in a glass case, changing color before thousands of visitors every day, and nobody could explain why. To understand why that proved so difficult, you need to know how glassmaking worked in 4th century Rome, and where exactly in that process something invisible could hide. By the 4th century, Rome was the largest producer of glass in the world. The glass-blowing pipe, invented in the 1st century BC, most likely in Syria, had spread across the entire empire over 3 centuries. Craftsmen knew how to add color. Manganese oxide gave violet. Copper oxide gave green or blue. Iron oxide gave amber. This was predictable chemistry. The craftsmen had a recipe. They knew what they were doing. The Lycurgus Cup doesn't fit this system. Its color doesn't come from a dye. It changes depending on the direction of light. This is a physically different principle, and it has nothing to do with how oxide pigments work. Researcher Ian Freestone of University College London in the British Museum proposed a hypothesis. The dichroic effect was discovered by accident when microscopic particles of gold or silver entered the molten glass. perhaps from the walls of a crucible, perhaps from tools used in jewelry work nearby. But here is what makes the accidental theory uncomfortable. To achieve the concentration of nanoparticles found in the cup, craftsmen would have needed to add 330 parts of silver and 40 parts of gold per million units of glass. That is a proportion impossible to achieve in a single manual addition. Most likely, the craftsman first dissolved the metal into a large volume of molten glass, then repeatedly diluted it with pure glass, gradually bringing the concentration down to the right level. This is not an accident. This is process control. They were managing something they couldn't see. Just how precisely they controlled it only became clear after one experiment. In 1990, in the laboratory of the British Museum, researchers Barber and Ian Freestone place a fragment of the glass under a transmission electron microscope. A transmission electron microscope can resolve objects down to 0.1 nanometers. A standard optical microscope stops at around 200 nanometers. The difference is 2,000 times. On the screen, particles appear. Rounded, metallic, 50 to 100 nanometers in size, embedded directly inside the glass, not on the surface, but within. X-ray analysis reveals the composition, a silver-gold alloy, a ratio of approximately 7:3 silver to gold, with the addition of around 10% copper. This is not a pigment, not a dye. This is a nanostructured metallic composite, a class of materials that modern science only began deliberately developing in the 1980s. Barber and Freestone's paper was published in the journal Archaeometry in 1990. In 2007, Freestone, together with Nigel Meeks, Margaret Sachs, and Catherine Higgett, published an expanded analysis in Gold Bulletin titled The Lycurgus Cup, a Roman Nanotechnology. Note the wording, not mystery, not unexplained phenomenon, nanotechnology. That word appears in the title of a peer-reviewed scientific paper applied to an object from the 4th century AD. The physical effect behind the color change, surface plasmon resonance, was first mathematically described by physicist Gustav Mie in 1908. Roman craftsmen were using it in practice in 300 AD. The gap between practice and theory, 608 years. But why this particular composition produces two different colors depends on how light travels through the glass. And that is the most astonishing part of the entire construction. When light hits the cup from outside, it reflects. The silver nanoparticles scatter the green part of the spectrum. The cup appears dark green, like jade. When a light source is placed inside, the light travels through the glass. Now the gold nanoparticles take over. They absorb the blue and green parts of the spectrum. Only red passes through. The cup glows deep blood red. This is not a random mixture of two metals. Silver handles green in reflection. Gold handles red in transmission. Each metal performs a precise function. This is a two-component optical system built into a single piece of glass, one that switches modes depending on the direction of light. And the size of the particles is critical. Increase them to even 150 nanometers. The effect disappears. Decrease them to 20, the color shifts. 4th century craftsmen held the size within a range of 50 to 100 nanometers, without a single measuring instrument. Freestone's hypothesis. Size was controlled through the temperature of the melt and the rate of cooling. The faster the glass cooled, the smaller the particles. The craftsmen were managing nanostructure through a thermal process, intuitively, without theory, through nothing but accumulated generational knowledge. For comparison, the Eiffel Tower is repainted every 7 years to protect its metal from corrosion. This Roman cup manages light at the atomic level, without a single gram of paint, without a single written instruction, for 1,700 years. In 2019, scientists at Wageningen University in the Netherlands replicated the de Croix effect using a 3D printer. They embedded gold and silver nanoparticles into a polymer matrix. The results were published in the Beilstein Journal of Nanotechnology, the first confirmed precise replication of the cup's effect, 1,700 years later. But that raises the central question. If the technology worked, why did it disappear? Why has no other complete object from this type of glass survived to the present day? De Croix glass was produced in Rome for no more than 1 century, approximately from 290 to 400 AD. Only a handful of fragments of other dichroic glass from this period survive. Not one of them is a complete object. One fragment, measuring 5 by 7 centimeters, is held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. That is essentially everything that remains of an entire direction in material science. Freestone established that producing the cup likely required 3 separate workshops, possibly in different parts of the empire. The glass blank may have been made in Egypt or Palestine, the dichroic glass itself in a specialist workshop, the carved scene of Lycurgus by master engravers. This was a production chain, not a single genius, a system of people. When the economic and political upheavals of the late 4th century began tearing apart the trading networks within the empire, that chain broke, and the knowledge was not passed on. Late Roman craft knowledge was not recorded in texts. There were no manuals, no textbooks, only direct transmission from master to apprentice, through observation and repetition. When a master died without passing on the technique died with him. According to researcher Julian Henderson of the University of Nottingham, writing in The Science and Archaeology of Materials, 2000, it was precisely the instability of production chains in the late antique period that explains the disappearance of several classes of complex materials, including certain types of colored glass and specific metal alloys. Corning Glass Works, an American company and one of the world's leading glass producers, reproduced the cup's material by chemical composition. The effect was confirmed, but the exact production technology of the original remains unknown. We know what was created. We still don't know precisely how, and that leads us to the central question, the one the textbooks walk around. The official narrative on the history of nanotechnology goes like this. Humanity learned to control matter at the nanoscale in the second half of the 20th century. It is an invention of our time, a product of modern science. The Lycurgus Cup does not fit this framework, and this is not a disputed interpretation. This is the conclusion of peer-reviewed research. The craftsmen of Rome did not know the phrase plasmon resonance. They had not read Maxwell's equations, but they created an object in which that resonance operates precisely and reproducibly. They achieved it by controlling temperature, metal concentration, and the rate at which molten glass cooled. This is engineering without a theoretical foundation, and possibly its most difficult form, because there are no calculations here. There is only the result in generations of people who knew how to reproduce it. In 2020, the same Dutch team published a second paper in the Bijlstein Journal of Nanotechnology, this time on 3-dimensional printing of a gold-silver nanocomposite. Their conclusion, precise control of metal ratios at the nanoscale, is a task that requires precision equipment. Roman craftsmen had no such equipment, but they had the result. Today, the Lycurgus Cup is included in academic courses on the history of nanotechnology as the first documented example of nanostructured optical effects being used in a material. Courses taught at UCL and several European technical universities. This is no longer a matter of debate among specialists. It is a standard teaching example. Researchers today are attempting to use this ancient principle to build ultra-sensitive detectors for water contamination. A technology born for the banquet tables of 4th century Rome may save millions of lives 1,700 years after its invention. One question still has no confirmed answer. How exactly did the craftsmen control the size of the nanoparticles? Until that question is answered, the history of nanotechnology remains unfinished. The Lycurgus Cup is not an artifact of mystery, it is an artifact of precision. Someone in 4th century Rome knew, if you add the right amount of the right metal to molten glass and cool it at the right speed, you get an object that changes color depending on the direction of light. Green on the outside, red from within. No dyes, no explanation. Forever. They didn't know why it worked, but they knew how, and they did it for an entire century, until the collapse of the empire broke the chain. Nanotechnology in the textbooks begins in the 1980s. In reality, it begins in the 4th century AD. The documented gap, 16 centuries. This is not a theory, not an interpretation. This is the conclusion of peer-reviewed research published in Gold Bulletin, Archaeometry, and the Beilstein Journal of Nanotechnology, confirmed by replication of the effect in laboratories across 3 different countries. The next time someone tells you that nanotechnology is an achievement of our era, you know the answer, and now you know exactly why. If this video changed something in how you understand history, hit subscribe, because the next artifact we're going to examine rewrites an equally important date in the textbooks.